Welcome to the Federal Fiscal Year 2025 VOCA Grant Management Workshop. I'm Kristen Wood-Hegner, the VAWA Grant Administrator with the Crime Victims Reparation Commission, or CVRC. We're excited to have you join us today to learn more about grant management for the VOCA Award. In this workshop, we'll cover the following topics: a CVRC overview, Federal Fiscal Year 2025 VOCA contracts and special conditions, financial management including budget revisions and match requirements, grant management requirements including time and attendance, travel, contracts, downloads, and progress reporting, grant fraud, waste, and abuse, and civil rights. In the description for this webinar is a link to a survey. Please complete the survey as a record of your attendance. CVRC requires the financial point of contact, the authorized individual, and the program manager to participate in this workshop. In 1981, the New Mexico legislature created the Crime Victims Reparation Commission as an agency led by a governor-appointed commission with 5 members to assist victims of violent crime. CVRC's mission is to ensure that victims of violent crime don't experience financial hardship because of their victimization. And our compensation department provides reimbursement for eligible expenses related to the crime, like funeral expenses, medical expenses, and loss of wages. We are the payer of last resort, meaning that we will only pay what is remaining after other sources of payment, such as health insurance, have been exhausted. The CVRC Grants Department also supports victims and their families by administering federal and state funds to support programs like yours throughout the state. We're committed to providing you with the support you need to be successful. We also assist your agencies in meeting your subgrant requirements, such as reporting and invoicing. And we have strong internal control systems in place to demonstrate to the federal government that funds are used appropriately. We offer training, technical assistance, and funding to help our subgrantees provide quality services to victims of crime. In fact, you may find any one of our Grants Department team members assisting you because we assign invoicing and reporting on a rotating basis. This ensures that no one person is always responsible for the same tasks, and each item is viewed by multiple people, which federal auditors appreciate because it improves compliance with grant conditions. Today, we're specifically talking about the victim assistance funding that we receive from the Office for Victims of Crime, or OVC. The Victims of Crime Act was passed by Congress and signed into law by President Ronald Reagan on October 12, 1984, establishing the Crime Victims Fund, or CVF, which provides funds to states for victims' assistance and compensation programs that offer support and services to those affected by violent crimes. Funds are deposited annually into the CVF from criminal fines, penalties, forfeited bail bonds, and special assessments collected by the federal government. Crime Victims Fund dollars do not come from taxpayers. They come from people or corporations convicted of federal crimes. In July 2021, President Biden signed the VOCA Fix Act to sustain the Crime Victim Fund. Among other provisions, this law, 1, requires funds collected by the federal government under deferred and non-prosecution agreements to be deposited into the Crime Victims Fund. 2, clarifies that states may waive a requirement that victim compensation programs promote victim cooperation with law enforcement. And 3, provides the Attorney General with the authority to provide no-cost extensions to all Victims of Crime Act award recipients. Most importantly, this act is intended to allow OVC to continue funding essential and life-saving services to crime victims, which are provided by victim service providers nationwide. In July, CVRC issued a request for proposals, or RFP, for continuation applications for VOCA funds, in compliance with the State of New Mexico's procurement regulations. Recommendations for continuation funding were presented to the Commission in August. CVRC then notified awardees and provided an award letter via application negotiation and WebGrants. Upon review of the completion of application special conditions, a final award letter and contract was sent via DocuSign in early October. Subgrantees should maintain award letters on file for CVRC site visits and federal audits. The award letters include the amount awarded to your agency for this third year of continuation funding. CVRC will upload the completed contracts to WebGrants. CVRC awards VOCA subgrants on 4-year funding cycles that are contingent on maintaining good standing and submission of an annual application. The specific level for future funding cycles from the Office for Victims of Crime, or OVC, remains uncertain. Future VOCA appropriations will determine future year allocations. We anticipate the funding levels for federal fiscal year 2026 to remain the same. The level of federal funding New Mexico receives determines awards. As part of the RFP process, CVRC reviewed all applicants' most recent audit reports in their entirety. Agencies with audit reports with material weaknesses or significant deficiencies that put them at risk are provided with additional monitoring and technical assistance to ensure that we are responsible and accountable for the funding, that we're able to demonstrate our fiscal prudence to the federal government and auditors, and that we help these agencies develop the organizational capacity to stabilize. If there are additional monitoring requirements in your award letter, please be sure that individuals responsible for meeting those requirements are aware. Invoices must be submitted with all required supporting documentation. We cannot process and reimburse for an invoice lacking required documentation. We'll discuss invoices in more detail later in this presentation. CVRC conducts in-person site visits with our subgrantees. If a site visit is requested, we will send the agency a pre-visit questionnaire to be completed prior to the visit. Next, we'll review your contract and highlight key special conditions. It is important that the agency read and understand all special conditions, as you will be expected to develop policies within your agency to adhere to these conditions. If you have not yet signed your contract, please do so in DocuSign at your earliest convenience, and CVRC will upload it to WebGrants once it's been executed. Please don't hesitate to ask us for assistance. Reimbursement or payment against invoices cannot be processed until a signed contract is in WebGrants, and the first invoice is due November 12th. On the first page of the contract, you can find the federal award program, the federal award number, the amount of your award, and your award period, which for federal fiscal year is October 1st through September 30th. It also reminds you that payment is by reimbursement only. Please review all conditions listed in your contract. It is important to remain compliant because these conditions are required by the Code of Federal Regulations, the Victims of Crime Act, the Office for Victims of Crime, the conditions of the federal award, and state laws. When CVRC or federal auditors review programs, they are looking for compliance with these conditions. Now, we want to highlight some of these conditions. This agreement can be terminated by the parties just like any other contract. You have to maintain your records, and CVRC, DOJ, and OVC can inspect them. Any amendments must be submitted through WebGrants for approval, and you must comply with equal opportunity employment laws. The primary project components in your proposal guide your scope of work. Prior to the selection of personnel to be hired with grant funds, the subrecipient agrees to provide CVRC with the names and resumes of the candidates recommended for hiring. Your direct service staff must attend at least one CVRC training on victim compensation, and you can find the dates and links at cvrc.nm.gov. Your agency agrees that you will inform all potentially eligible victims and assist them in filing for victim compensation and assist in the submission of their compensation application. You also agree to notify and assist victims with VINE, the Automated Victim Notification System. If you would like more information on VINE, reach out to our office. You must post your grievance policies where they are easily seen. This posting must include the names and contact information for CVRC as an agency funder. You must let us know if a federal agency deems you to be high risk, and CVRC may add additional requirements to the funding. You must comply with all applicable sections of 34 U.S. Code 12291B, including Section 13, which prohibits discrimination. We'll talk about this more in detail later in the presentation. You agree to comply with the DOJ Financial Guide and Part 200 uniform requirements. that you must report potentially duplicative funding to CVRC. Out-of-state travel must be approved by CVRC ahead of time, and there must be no commingling of funds. This means the agency must have a good accounting system. You cannot supplant federal funds, meaning you can't direct or reduce the state or local funds that you're receiving because you think the VOCA grant could cover that expense. That's called supplanting. Payment is by reimbursement only. We reimburse for expenses from the prior month. Invoices for expenditures are due to our office by the 10th of the month, or if our office is closed on the 10th of the month, like it's a holiday or a weekend, then it would be the business day after. Because of state requirements and the end of the state fiscal year, the June invoices may be due a little earlier, so be sure to read all communications sent regarding the VOCA award. There are requirements related to the allowability of program income, and there is a federal limit on the consultant rate. We cannot support the purchase of food for meetings, conferences, or trainings. We do have some programs that we support food for victims related to shelter programs, but we cannot support food or beverages for meetings, conferences, or trainings. Promptly refer not only to the Department of Justice, but our office as well, if there's any credible evidence of actual or perceived fraud, waste, abuse, or misconduct, or if you suspect a program may potentially be discriminating against clients or is not able to provide assistance to clients. We want you to share these concerns with our office so that we can look into them, provide technical assistance if necessary, or prevent further harm. If you're not in compliance, either CVRC or the federal government may deem the agency high risk and add additional conditions to your grant. There are many provisions regarding civil rights and discrimination against employees and the people you're serving. We'll go into those in more detail in a little bit, but just briefly, applications were required to account for access needs for disabled participants who have limited English proficiency, and deaf and hard of hearing participants. Agencies may not compromise victim safety and recovery. Inaccessibility may also be considered as compromising victim safety, and this is something CVRC monitors. The subrecipient agrees to utilize volunteers within the organization to support the agency's services and mission. The subrecipient must make determinations of suitability before individuals may interact with participating minors. This requirement applies regardless of an individual's employment status. Subrecipients must complete the following required searches for individuals: a name-based search of the required public sex offender and child abuse registries, such as the Drew Sojan National Sex Offender Public website, and a fingerprint-based criminal history search of the required criminal history registries or similar repositories, covering at least 5 calendar years preceding the date of the search request. If fingerprint-based searches are legally unavailable, a name-based search using current and previous names and aliases is required. All searches must cover jurisdictions in which the individual has lived, worked, or went to school during the past 5 years. An individual does not meet suitability if they 1. Withholds consent to a required criminal history search, 2. Knowingly makes a false statement that affects or is intended to affect any required search, 3. Is listed as a registered sex offender on the Drew Sojan National Sex Offender Public website, 4. To the knowledge of the subrecipient, has been convicted, whether as a felony or misdemeanor, under federal, state, tribal, or local law of any of the following crimes: 1. Sexual or physical abuse, neglect, or endangerment of an individual under the age of 18 at the time of the offense. 2. Rape or sexual assault, including conspiracy to commit rape or sexual assault. 3. Sexual exploitation, such as through child pornography or sex trafficking. 4. Kidnapping. 5. Voyeurism. If you have any questions about any of these conditions, please reach out to our office. Publications and materials published with VOCA funds must include the language on your screen with your specific grant number specified. Quarterly reporting is submitted through the Office for Justice Programs website. This program measurement tool, PMT report, is due by the 15th of the month following the end of each quarter. For example, the first PMT report will be due January 15th for October through December. CVRC will send out an email reminder when it's time to submit. Please note that the OJP system does not open for agencies to enter data until the quarter has ended. Agencies must include, with their data, a case history or success story in which VOCA funds were used to assist crime victims for each quarter. Quarter 4 report will include questions requesting cumulative information. The questions are subject to change per the Office of Justice Programs. Now you have been awarded funds specifically to implement the project using the budget to meet the objectives and goals in your proposal. If your activities are within these boundaries and not subject to one of the conditions we just talked about in the contract, then you can take those actions without requesting additional permission. However, if you deviate from that, it is grant fraud. Fraud isn't always intentional. It can be accidental, a slippery slope of misuse and mismanagement of funds, or even well-intended. Even in these instances, there can be fiscal and even criminal consequences, so we want to help you mitigate those risks. An example is conflict of interest in the procurement process. As a subgrantee receiving federal funds, you should make decisions free of undisclosed personal or organizational conflicts of interest, both in fact and in appearance, so perception matters. When purchasing goods or services, like training or consultation, from a relative or a business associate, subgrantees must follow proper procurement, meaning follow the laws and your agency's policies and procedures. An example of a conflict of interest is securing a trainer because you've known them for 20 years without soliciting for the position by properly issuing a request for training proposals. You have potentially excluded equally or better qualified candidates. Vendor selection must be fair and transparent, and the selected vendors must have reasonable rates and specific verifiable work products. Lying or failing to report means unilaterally redirecting the use of funds. For example, if you're funded to provide a particular program, but then decide to change your programming without prior permission, if this happens, CVRC will try to help agencies resolve the issue. However, sometimes agencies redirect funds to ineligible activities or purchases, and they cannot be reimbursed for those expenses. You must also be able to adequately account for transactions and represent the eligibility of funding, so keep good records of documentation related to transactions and expenditures. If you have a question about allowable costs, please reach out to our office. To prevent fraud, examine your program's policies and procedures to identify vulnerabilities. CVRC looks at these during site visits, and we can identify vulnerabilities and make recommendations based on other programs we've assisted with fraud prevention strategies, and to establish well-designed and tested systems of internal controls. For example, it's risky to assign a single staff person to open mail, reconcile the accounting system, deposit checks, and write checks for the agency, because that person has a lot of power with little oversight to prevent conflicts of interest, procurement violations, and other types of fraud, waste, and abuse. Agencies should have fully documented and proper procurement policies and procedures that are administered across the entire agency, not just the grant-funded segments. If you have unrestricted funds that don't require a procurement policy, but your agency does have a procurement policy, then you're federally required to follow that procurement policy even with those unrestricted funds. Adhering to an agency-wide procurement policy also demonstrates that you're being good stewards of other funds. OVC had previously waived the match funding requirement due to the National Emergency Pandemic Mandate. However, match is required again beginning October 1st, 2024. State VOCA gap funding will be used as match this year in fiscal year 2025, and match will again be required in fiscal year 2026. Invoices are submitted through the grant management system WebGrants at nmcvrcgrants.com. Invoice dates should be by the first of the month to the last day of the month. For example, the first invoice will be October 1st through October 31st. The next invoice will be November 1st through November 30th. Remember, your first invoice for October is due on November 12th, and the invoices are submitted monthly or quarterly, depending on the agency's special conditions, with an accounting sheet and support documentation. If an invoice is submitted late, you may need to wait for reimbursement until the following month. Templates for the accounting sheet and time and activity sheet can be downloaded from our website. CVRC staff will check the line items against your budget, your documentation, and what you have submitted in WebGrants, so please make sure all of those align. For example, make sure you have enough in your budget so that an expenditure will not cause one of your line items to go into the negative. Do the supporting time and attendance reports match the pay rate, hours, and staff that are in your budget? Do all the subtotals in WebGrants match the subtotals on the accounting sheet? If you need to adjust your budget, a budget revision request can also be submitted through WebGrants. If you have any questions when working on an invoice or considering a budget revision, please do not hesitate to contact the CVRC Grants Department. We're here to help you. Before submitting an invoice, please check that the dates are correct and that your accounting sheet is submitted as an Excel file. An Excel file allows you to write notes in the margins if you need to explain something, and we can see your work and the formulas that you've used. If you're revising your budget, please wait to submit your invoice until after the revision has been approved. The VOCA invoicing is a little different this year. First, submit accounting sheets and supporting documentation to the state VOCA gap each month. Then, submit those same accounting sheets and documentation to the federal VOCA for match. Agencies will bill 100% of expenses to the state VOCA gap until all the state funds are exhausted. Only once a line item is fully expended will you begin to bill to the federal VOCA. To submit an invoice in WebGrants, go to Grants and then click the grant that you want to submit an invoice for. Click Invoices, add claim. It'll be for reimbursement. Your first invoice will be for July 1st through July 31st, and click Save Form. Now there's a check mark there for that component. Click Reimbursement. And now you'll see the budget from your proposal. This budget has two positions. One is vacant, one is filled. So we're going to go to Edit Reimbursement. Vacant, we're not going to have an expense there. Staff person. This will be their salary. And then we want to do it for the same staff person, their benefits. So, 200, save reimbursement. And now you'll see subtotals for expenses this period. These are the subtotals that you want to make sure match your other documents and match your accounting sheet. This is something that CVRC will look for when we're reviewing your invoices. So we'll mark as complete. Okay, takes me back here, invoice supporting documentation. This is where you would upload, you'd say add new attachment and upload a file for your timesheet, your receipts, any invoices from a contractor. You would mark as complete. Won't let me mark it because I don't have anything submitted. Go to next. Okay. Invoice advice. This is where you'll upload your accounting sheet. Please upload your accounting sheet as an Excel document. You can write notes in the margins if an explanation is needed for one of your expenditures. We recommend showing your work. Use formulas instead of just entering a number directly into a cell. That way the grants department staff can see what you were doing. When that's done, you can go back to your claims list. And these will all have check marks. And then you'll have a submit button. Budget revisions are also submitted in WebGrants as a type of contract amendment. Let's walk through a demonstration now. You'll go to Grants, click the grant that you want to revise the budget for. Scroll down to Contract Amendments, not budget. I know it's confusing. Contract Amendments. Add Amendment. This will be a budget revision. Add title. Let's say there's a staff change. Let's say we filled that position. Okay, budget revision, vacant advocate position filled. Now you'll enter the details of what your new budget will look like. You'll start with requested budget amendments, and you'll put in what the subtotals of each of these categories should be in your new budget. Then scroll down. This budget narrative adjustment will be more detailed than what we've already written. So for example, this is a staff change. So I want to put the new staff person's name, how many hours a week they're working, 40 hours a week on VAWA. If we were doing a match, we would write the match here. So if they were doing 20 on VAWA, 20 on our match, we would write that. We'll put the rate. So you say $20 an hour. And any other details, of course, what their position is. They would be the victim advocate. If you're moving funds from one category to another, so let's say you had in-state travel, but you want to go to an out-of-state conference, you would write those details here. You'd write the information about the conference, where you're going, and you would specify we want to move this line item, the funds in this line item, from in-state to out-of-state. And scroll down. And this budget will be automatically generated. This is what your current budget is. You want to double check that the total program budget here, so your federal, your match, and your total, that matches what you have up here in your totals. So the totals for your requested budget amendment should match the totals in your current budget, even if your subcategories are changing. And then you'll add your documentation. So for our example, with our new staff coming in, we would want to add their resume. This is where you would add your budget amendment sheet that you can download on CVRC's website, and it's linked in the description. And then every time you make a change, you want to click Save Grid, Save Form. Go back to the amendment list. Then if I had submitted the documents, we would have a check there, and we would be able to submit here. To learn more about invoices, budget revisions, and navigating WebGrants, please watch the WebGrants playlist on the New Mexico Crime Victims Reparation Commission YouTube channel. Consultants and other contractual services are required to submit contracts that specify the start date, end date, hourly rate, number of hours, and a description of services. The contract must be signed by both parties. Please submit contracts to CVRC for review prior to execution to ensure adherence to federal guidelines. Programs and projects that receive funding through CVRC must meaningfully collaborate with community partners providing services to victims of crime, particularly law enforcement, the courts, prosecutors, and victim service providers. It's important to build collaborative relationships to leverage all the resources available to victims of crime. Now we'll cover the civil rights obligations in your contracts, including compliance with the Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Safe Streets Act, the Victims of Crime Act, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Age Discrimination Act, Title IX, and the U.S. Department of Justice regulations on equal treatment for faith-based organizations. Title VI of the Civil Rights Act states that no person in the United States shall, on the grounds of race, color, or national origin, be excluded from participation and denied the benefits in or subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal funding. The Victims of Crime Act requires no person on the grounds of race, color, religion, national origin, disability, or sex be discriminated against or denied access. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act protects disabled individuals and individuals with physical or mental disabilities that substantially limit one or more life activities, have a record of impairment, or are regarded as having an impairment. It also requires large agencies and agencies receiving high levels of federal funding to have a compliance coordinator. The Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, also protects disabled individuals and individuals with physical or mental disabilities, including the deaf and hard of hearing, who are also protected under the Limited English Proficiency Plan. The Age Discrimination Act protects individuals from being denied services based upon age. Title IX of the Educational Amendment of 1972 regards discrimination in educational programs receiving federal funding. The Equal Treatment of Faith-Based Organizations prohibits discrimination against organizations on the basis of religion, defined as any religious practice or sincerely held moral or ethical beliefs. Under this federal funding, no one shall be excluded on the basis of race, ethnicity, color, religion, national origin, including language, disability, sex, sexual orientation, or gender identity. The following are examples of civil rights violations. A funded domestic violence clinic has a blanket policy of only providing services to female victims of domestic violence and does not serve victims of other genders. Male employees at a funded detention center sexually harass female occupants. A culturally based sexual assault program primarily designed to provide services to Latina individuals turns away individuals of other ethnicities seeking services. As a CVRC funding recipient, you must provide reasonable accommodations for disabilities, in addition to ensuring reasonable access to individuals, regardless of their race, color, national origin, religion, gender, age, sexual orientation, and gender identity. CVRC is required to monitor your organization's civil rights compliance by looking at your policies and procedures, such as who do you report civil rights violations to? How do you train staff and volunteers on civil rights? How do you inform clients about filing a grievance? When you receive a complaint, are you forwarding it to the EEOC, the Office for Civil Rights, and CVRC? CVRC has clear policies and procedures that explain how an individual can complain directly to our office, how we will refer the complaint, and how we will acknowledge and train on the requirements related to the complaint. CVRC also has a 501 coordinator to ensure programs meet the OCR requirements. We have grievance policies, limited English proficiency policies, statements that our programs are aware of these various civil rights compliance policies, and these assurances are in our subgrantee contracts. One of your grants requirements is to download CVRC's civil rights policies from the grants section of our website. You can find a link to the website in the description of this video. You're also required to disseminate these policies appropriately throughout your organization, and your authorized official must email cvrc.grants@cvrc.nm.gov to say that you have received these policies. Before you close this video, please remember to complete the survey using the link in the description to document your attendance, and email the Grants Department at cvrc.grants@cvrc.nm.gov to let us know that you attended. This is a requirement of the grant, and you'll find a link to download the presentation slides there as well. Please ensure all staff have completed OVC TTAC training and submit your agency audit and WebGrants via the correspondence function. Thank you for attending this workshop. The CVRC Grants Department is available to answer any questions that you may have. Please know that we are here to help organizations be successful in implementing your awards, so do not hesitate to reach out for assistance and answers. We thank all of you for the important work you do in supporting New Mexico's victims of violent crime, and we wish you a successful fiscal year.